Well, welcome everyone. I'm so glad to be here and I'm glad all of you are here as well. My name's Jocelyn Chapman and I'm chair of the Transformative Inquiry Department and core faculty in the Transformative Leadership Online Master's Program, which is sponsoring this session with Kerubo Abuya. I am going to introduce her shortly, but I first want to just welcome you all here, and especially those of you who are considering doing a program at CIIS. This is a really wonderful, very, very special school. So I'm glad you're here, and I hope you'll consider one of our programs as well. I'll put the link to our department in the chat box before I go, so you can investigate it if you haven't yet. But I thought I would also share with you how I met Kerubo, which was at a 2020 pandemic era meeting on video with the International Leadership Association. She was a spotlighted panelist on a session titled, What is Generating the Shift Toward Authoritarian Leadership? This is an excellent speaker. Wow. Systems thinker, compelling speaker. Who is that? And so I Googled her because that's what I do. I'm a researcher. And I found out that Dr. Abuya is a graduate of Saybrook's Ph.D. program in organizational systems with concentrations in organizational leadership and transformation. So I'm warming up. It's like, oh, that's cool. And then I read more and learn that she's taken different training sessions at Riane Eisler's Center for Partnership Studies. Huge fan of Riane Eisler's work. And this is somebody who's an expert in that. It's like, wow, this person should teach at in TLD, our Transformative Leadership Program. And she does. So she'll be teaching a Ways of Relating course to incoming Transformative Leadership students this fall. She's taught other courses as well. I'm going to let her say some more about herself, but I'm just really glad that you're here. I think you're going to enjoy this session a lot. And Dr. Kerubo Abuya, very warm welcome to you, and thank you for being here for this session.
Thank you so much, Jocelyn, for the warm welcome. Enjoy your retreat, and I look forward to the conversation with everyone. Thanks, everyone. It's wonderful to be here with you all. Thank you so much for taking time to join us today to discuss transformative leadership, systems thinking, and leading change during times of complexity and uncertainty. I think Jocelyn has done an intro of who I am from the work that I do at CIIS, but I really consider myself a transdisciplinary activist scholar practitioner. So while my background is in organizational change, leadership, and transformation, worked within organizational context, I've also done a lot of work within the social change or systems change context, especially around looking at women, advancing women's human rights, but also just really understanding the big picture of the system that we change, looking at systems change at a deeper level. So thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. And let's get started. Great, there we go. All right. So we'll be looking at systems thinking, transformative leadership within the context of leading change in times of complexity and uncertainty. So we will lay ground, context by looking at what do we mean by complexity. So we'll be looking at complexity theory, systems thinking, we'll define transformative leadership, and then we'll start making those connections between systems thinking and transformative leadership, and also leading change. So these different areas are really very broad. So what we are doing today is just an introduction because the areas are very broad. So I'll be going a little fast because we don't have a lot of time, but I also want us to be able to at least, follow and appreciate the connection between transformative leadership, systems thinking, and leading change. So I'll start by defining systems thinking. I'll use Bella Bernathy's definition of systems thinking. Says it's a term as an internalized manifestation in the thinking of individuals or social systems. So it's really a term that encompasses other terms like systems concepts, systems principles, and systems model. Bernathy and Walton say that systems unfold large sets of concepts that are common to complex systems, such as human or social systems. So for the large part, this presentation will be looking at social systems or human activity systems, but we'll look at the different types of systems. Again, this is an overview, so there's a lot, we can go into a lot more depth than what we are going to cover today. So to make these concepts more concrete and useful, these are very useful for designing interventions or designing new systems. And we can also organize these sets of principles into systems models. This is where they become very important when we start looking at leadership and change. So further in defining systems thinking, when we start looking at these different sets and models of implications about the way we think, which is the systems thinking, aspect of this, the way we understand phenomena, meaning having a systems perspective or lens when we are trying to understand a phenomenon. We can characterize this an entity, having a systems description, and also understand how an entity behaves in terms of the behavior it exhibits as a system. So looking at systems behavior. And then also we can carry out disciplined inquiry or research or study through engaging in a systems inquiry. So we'll start looking at what this means. So for example, when we start talking about social systems, which is what we're going to focus on largely during today's conversation, we start looking at human activity systems. These are systems that are organized from interacting and interdependent components that are engaged in carrying out functions by which they attain their purposes. So social systems typically have a purpose and they have different components which are interconnected. They are open to and interact with the environment from which they receive input required for their existence. So systems have input and they also actually have outputs, but they really rely on this input for them to exist. Bernathy further says social systems are value-guided systems and asserts that they are independent of biological need fulfillment, reproductive needs of the species. Social systems satisfy not bodily needs, but values. So again, we'll be looking at values, but we will see that systems, especially complex systems, also can exist as natural systems beyond what we'll be looking at. And we'll look at that, again, very briefly. So, but we start looking at in what form do they do so depends on the specific kind of values people happen to have. So further, when we start looking at systems thinking within the context of praxis, again, now we've looked at the theory, but when we start looking at bringing together theory and practice from a systems perspective, I'm going to use Kathia Laszlo, work. Laszlo describes systems thinking as thinking about the world. This is Checkland, who talks about thinking about the world through the concept of a system. So we see different phenomena, or even within where if we took organizations as a system, for example, there are people who see it as an organization that's composed of interconnected components. We have people, we have technology, we have departments, we have functions, we have tools that we use. All of these, their processes, their relationships, these are systems. But there are people who don't have that awareness, see the organization from a very different perspective. So this involves thinking in terms of processes rather than just structures, like just buildings, seeing organizations be beyond their physical, their physicality, but their structures that we see, but we know their processes that keep this organization going or in existence. Their relationships, rather than just components, but there's relationships between these different components. Most importantly, there's interconnectedness. There are interconnections rather than separation, the silos. So again, when we're coming from a systems perspective, we acknowledge these interconnections. So systems thinking bridges between positivist and holistic approaches to study of human phenomena. Utilizes both analysis and synthesis to create knowledge, understanding, integrating an ethical perspective as well. So the analysis answers the what and the how questions when we are looking at a human phenomenon, and the synthesis questions address the why and the what for questions. Why should we care, and what for? So when we start bringing the praxis together, we start looking at a general meaning of praxis containing different elements of dynamism, change, reshaping ideas into actions. So it's really an act of engaging, exercising, and practicing ideas. So it's just not a concept, that's something that we think about, because the systems thinking concept can be very misleading. Sometimes it just stays in the head. It's just about the thinking, but really we have to operationalize. We have to embody our systems thinking. That is why we'll see there's also systems ways of knowing and being. So Freire talks about the notion of praxis. It defines it as the process of acting upon conditions one faces in order to change them. It implies critical reflections, awareness of the process and its aim. So beyond just thinking, as we're doing this work, we are reflecting. We're being very self-aware and aware of what's going on around us. It's a process, and we also have a goal. We have an aim. So taking actions, it's typical. Practice is very useful within the systems thinking context also, for example, for change, for radical change. And this is change often that needs more structural change. Look at the values level, deeper levels of change, not surface value change. That's where we are looking at how can we address some of those complex challenges that we face in the world. Now, I'm going to also use the work of David Straw to look at systems orientation in terms of the tools. So when looking at systems thinking and praxis tools, how do we practice and embody this in our leadership, which we're going to look at. So we have to deploy what we call a systems thinking orientation. This simply translates to a systems way of knowing, and also Katya Laszlo is where this Katya comes in, a system way of feeling and being. So we move from just the thinking to knowing, an inherent knowing, and the system's feeling and being. So this brings the whole self into the process. So it's not all surface and in the head or logical, just the logical aspect or the reasoning. So Straw asserts that systems thinking takes into account the fact that we are part of a system we seek to understand and influence. Becoming a systems thinker requires learning a new methodology, developing particular ways of looking at the world. So it actually requires us to move beyond ourselves and looking more outward into the world and our place in the world, as we're going to see. Now, some of the systems thinking and practice tools Straw talks about are the 5 C's. It requires curiosity, it requires clarity, it requires compassion, it requires choice. We become very aware that we have choices in the way we respond, in the way we interact. And most importantly, also, it requires courage as we move forward. So in the conventional way of thinking, when we start contrasting this with systems thinking, problems and causes, we assume that, that problems and causes are obviously connected. Yet from the systems thinking perspective, we start understanding that problems and causes are not obviously connected. It's not a linear relationship. Sometimes we can see an output of a system and assume it's not a cause and effect relationship. So often in conventional thinking, when we know they're obviously connected, it's very easy for us to blame others for the problem. Others are to blame. But then in systems thinking, we start realizing that we are part of the problem because there's a bigger picture than what we are seeing, perhaps as a symptom of something that we are framing as the problem. In conventional thinking, we look at short-term success leads to long-term success. We assume that short-term success or cumulative short-term success is going to lead to long-term success. But then in systems thinking, we understand that most quick fixes yield no difference or make matters worse over time. In systems thinking, we start looking at over time and understand that sometimes there is delayed outcomes, delayed feedback from the system. So it's not a direct cause effect linear relationships. In conventional thinking, we optimize the different parts of the system. Oh, we just need to fix this department. Oh, we just need to fix these people and their thinking and everything will be fine. But then in systems thinking, we start understanding relationships between the different parts of the systems. We start asking questions like, how can we improve the relationship between, and among the parts of a system? In conventional thinking, we we start thinking about do as much as you can, as quickly as you can. Quick results, quick to market, speed to market is the focus. But in systems thinking, we focus on a few key coordinated changes over time. It's not always about speed. It's sometimes about, slowing down in order to go further, to go forward, and to do more meaningful work. So those are the comparisons between the thinking. And again, this is Peter Stroh's work. Actually, the conference that Jocelyn mentioned that where we met, where Stroh was in the panel that I was part of. So his work is really resonates well with me. Now, starting to look at complexity. It's a framework used to understand systems composed of many interconnected parts that interact in unpredictable ways. So now complexity actually goes deeper to help us understand systems that sometimes what you see is not what you get, or what we assume to be the result of a certain cause is not the problem, or it's really not the cause. There may be other factors. So we understand the interconnected parts that interact in unpredictable ways. But often we're used to a conventional way of thinking of, just keep moving, just think, just keep doing, keep moving. But then in complexity theory, some of the characteristics are the non-linearity. Small changes can have large unpredictable effects. We start thinking about emergence. New properties of behaviors emerge from the interactions of individual components in that system. Many of them are often underseen. It's like the iceberg, where we just see the tip, but there are roots and there's so much going on. So the emergence and their new properties and behaviors that emerge because of the nature of the different interactions between the different components or parts of a system. Complex systems also are self-organizing. Systems can organize themselves without a central control or outside intervention. Adaptation systems adapt to changes in their environment, often in unpredictable ways. So those are some of the key characteristics. And then when we start looking at some of the really core characteristics as well, which helps us start answering questions. Why is this important, especially for leaders and transformative leaders? So we start understanding the dynamism. Systems are dynamic. They're constantly evolving and changing over time. They're not static, just like culture, within an organization, for example. It's not static. When we start working with an organization, if we've been there 10 years, 15 years, the organization has evolved, if we're looking at an organization. Interconnectedness. Elements within the system are linked and they influence each other, and their feedback loops, actions in one part of the system can reinforce or dampen other parts of the system. So we come to that realization that all these things are happening. Then we also start looking at, so for example, looking at complex systems theory. We have natural and bounded systems or unbounded systems. So for example, a forest is an ecosystem. As a perfect example of complexity, the interactions between the plants, the animals, the weather, the soil create an emergent, behaviors such as predator-prey relationships, plant growth, and of the biodiversity. This is a natural systems. For us humans, it's controlled by forces beyond our governance or our reach as humans to a large extent, although we can impact this system because this is also part of our environment. We are really ultimately also part of these ecosystems to a certain degree. The human brain is actually also another natural system. The human body it's unbounded. As much as we can control the system by the inputs in terms of our diet and how we treat our bodies, by and large, the human body is a complex system with millions of neurons that interact, leading to cognitive processes, the way we are learning, our consciousness. Again, I'm using that consciousness loosely, all emerging from seemingly simple interactions at the neuronal level. So again, this is a complex system. And then a social system, that's a bounded system, a social system that humans now have control of governing, for example, is the system of patriarchy. For my doctoral research, this was part of what I looked at for some of the work that I did in Kenya, really understanding the system of patriarchy and how it works and how it affects women's ability to realize their human rights, and how it affects or how it actually initiates, perpetuates, and reinforces, sustains oppression of women, for example, a patriarchy. So I'll use Alan Johnson's description of patriarchy as society is patriarchal to the degree that it promotes male privilege by being male-dominated, male-identified, and male-centered. It also organizes around an obsession with control, involves one of its key aspects as the oppression of women. Again, this is a system, but this is a system that's within our control as humans. But again, it's a complex system. So enabling change within that context, we have to start seeing it as a system and really understanding components of that. So further looking at this system of male authority, it legitimizes oppression of women through political, social, economic, legal, cultural, religious, and military institutions. This is the African Feminist Forum's definition of patriarchy. In this context, men's access to and control over resources and rewards within the private and public sphere derives its legitimacy from the patriarchal ideology of male domination. So for example, if we go to, let's say my community of heritage within the Abagusi is a highly patriarchal society where men typically have the control of resources, but the women work, and support that system. But then it's assumed that traditionally, it's assumed that the man owns a lot of the resources. Or when we see oppression of women, when we see domestic violence, which stems from the ideology that of male privilege and supremacy in terms of the human ranking system. When we look at Rian Eisler's work about human ranking, we start seeing systems of domination and systems of partnership. So patriarchy is a system of domination. But again, this is a system that we can change. So there's hope that we can have influence as leaders over such systems once we start looking at the big picture of the system and its values. So now I come to defining transformative leadership. We are going to look at transformative leadership from the perspective of how we see this at CIIS. I'm going to rely on an article by Alfonso Monturi and Gabriela Donnelly, who are faculty at CIIS. And this is a really wonderful article they wrote. This was a book chapter in the Handbook of Personal and Organizational Transformation. So I'm going to pull from excerpts from that article. It's what I'm going to share with you. So the world as we know it today, really, although they said this in 2011, we are really at the point where there's so much going on, so much transformation. Looks like one age is dying and a new one is coming out, and we don't even know what's emerging, especially now when we start looking at our geopolitical context, globally, not only in the US, but globally. We're seeing there's a lot of change, there's wars, there's authoritarian leadership and other aspects that we see within the leadership context. In fact, right now, it's not unclear what it would look like in terms of the future, and the visions of better futures are far and few, few and far between. So one of the premise, in fact, the basic premise of what transformative leadership is that everyone can lead, particularly at this transformative moment. Everybody contributes to, and in fact, co-creates the world that we live in. Whether conscious of it or their agency or not, we all create every choice, every action, every discussion, every interaction is a reflection of how we are leading our own lives. And again, transformative leadership goes beyond leadership as something that we do. It is a way of being, and it also starts with me. So transformative leadership actually looks at also as starts at our personal transformation level before we can step into a leadership context and influence others. So our every word, every action may be perceived as leadership by others to the extent that it influences them, whether consciously or unconsciously. So it invites everybody to ask what kind of world they are creating through their thoughts, their beliefs, their actions, and interactions. And to compare that with the kind of world we would like to create and the kind of person they would like to be. So transformative leadership actually calls us to really look at ourselves first as readers, as leaders. So transformative leadership can involve small actions, recognizing their cumulative effects and the potential of the butterfly effect. Small actions, gestures, words, even said casually and unthinkingly, can have a big impact or effect, whether in an intimate relationship or in a big organization. That is the transformative leadership we talk about at CIIS. So at the heart of it is really it's a participatory process of collective, collaborative transformation for mutual benefit. It's not confined to heroic individuals making large, drastic, actions and gestures. It's an active decision to acknowledge the current transformative moment, develop urgency, agency by consciously participating in it, and then giving this change a direction that allows individuals to embody higher values. Now, again, this brings us to values. They start making the connection between transformative leadership and systems thinking that we were looking at. It is value-laden. It's about values. In other words, to lead by creating the future in the present moment. So again, this is leadership practiced by everyday citizens. It's not heroic, charismatic. The concept of born leaders does not come into play. But then this is a time when, as we have planetary transformation, we can choose to engage in a transformative process to mobilize our creativity so that we can lead our own lives and also have influence in the world around us to create the desired outcomes that we would want to. So we, as opposed to being led by what they feel are outdated traditions, habits, social roles, demands, and pressures, transformative leaders feel that they can no longer accept, that the concept that this is how we've always done things, so things are going to be this way. It moves beyond that. It makes creative contribution towards leading society towards what we consider a better future. So this is also another premise of transformative leadership. So it's really not also a domain exclusive to educational leadership or social justice. It embraces psychological as well as spiritual, the social world, and the quest for social justice. In fact, one of the key aspects of transformative leadership is that they need to combine personal and social transformation. And then we view this process as one that occurs hand in hand. So in transformative leadership, we're also looking to grow and evolve as human beings and the way we show up in the world, again, grounded in the values that we embody, and then go step into the world to influence others or to influence change. Now, a lot of people talk about confuse transformative leadership with transformational leadership. I won't go too much into that, but for the most part, when people talk about transformational leadership or leaders, they're talking about charismatic leaders. They build trust, they act with integrity, they encourage others, they encourage innovative thinking, they coach and develop their people. This is great, this is all good. But one key difference between transformational and transformative leadership lies in the latter's view of leadership as an everyday, everyone, everywhere relational process. Again, relational process comes in. This takes it back to our systems thinking orientation, where we start looking at the relationships between the different parts or components and people, human beings, and beings within the different systems, and acknowledging everyone and knowing that those relationships actually contribute to the outcomes we get from that system. So I want to spend too much time on that difference, but then transformative leadership does not have a privileged focus or locus like an organization, whether it's a nonprofit or for-profit with specific roles, lines of authority or community. It can manifest in any context, which means it crosses between the public and the private. It can therefore manifest in everyday activities. It does not require or demand grand gestures or contexts. It proposes that everyday activities and small additional increments, actions can be transformative. So the fundamental assumption is that human beings lead and create all the time, whether they are, wherever they are or whoever they are. It involves first of all an acknowledgement or a recognition of this everydayness. And there's a lot we can say about it, but it's also creative and it is more interconnected. It's not about titles, it's not about positionality and authority. It's more personal as well as more social. It's a way of being in the world that embodies our highest ideals, allows us as leaders to make a contribution that reflects our values, hopes, and concerns. It reflects our aspiration to lead our lives, create our own form of leadership, collaborate with others on how to contribute to making the world a better place. There is no clearly established way to do it, let alone one right way, meaning it's a system that's open to everyone's contributions and voices. It's aspirational because it's an invitation to embody futures that barely exist in the current imagination. So it's really the conjunction of personal social transformation, and then it coincides with the existential questions of, what does it mean to be human? What human beings are capable of, what are we capable of as human beings? What does it mean to know? How can we relate to others? We start asking these questions. So tradition also, it asks questions about our traditional assumptions about nature. Sometimes we see nature as separate from us, but transformative leadership, which is aligned with systems thinking, we are part of nature, where nature is part of us. That's why, yes, we are tree huggers, because that's part of who we are, and we see that what the tree is exhaling, we are inhaling, and what we exhale, the tree is inhaling. So we start seeing those relationships, they're interconnected. The role of men and women is also challenged and questioned within this context from what we have been socialized, from the typical, conventional thinking. Then we start seeing the relationships between human beings and nature. So transformative leaders actually defy traditional images and stereotypes of what constitutes a leader and how a leader acts. Questions mostly reject old images and stereotypes of the great men, leaders, recognizes leadership of marginalized groups. I know it's sensitive. We are in a time where sometimes even using that term now is being questioned, but it does really bring in the people at the margins who for a long time have been left out in many processes in decision making. People like women, people of color, or those of marginalized sexual orientations and gender identities. It provides a generative framework for leaders orienting themselves towards emergent ways of being, relating, knowing, and doing. So there's a lot more we can say about transformative leadership, but it really aligns with the concept of systems thinking, systems practice, systems orientation. It's about participation and collaborative action. It involves conscious choice to participate in a process of collaborative creation for mutual benefits. That's the underlying. So when we start looking at transformative leadership and systems thinking and leading change, first we must start by doing our own critical reflection around our identities. Identity contributes a lot to the way we see the world. So we need to start asking questions like, who am I? Why am I here? What is my purpose? What are my values? How do I relate with others? How do I relate with the world? What is my place in the world? We really must start there as leaders from our own self-transformation and evolution standpoint, asking these questions of ourselves before we can step up to lead others. And this is where I'm going to use the example of, again, a value system. Again, we saw systems thinking it's a value-laden concept. Transformative leadership is also value-laden. So I'm going to use the example of the African philosophy of personhood. Actually, I go beyond that to say it's actually a consciousness. We call it Ubuntu. Some of you have heard about Ubuntu, which acknowledges and calls us, invites us to embody our interconnectedness. We start asking, who am I? But then in answering that question, we realize I am because we are. I am because we are. We realize that on my own, I cannot be. I am. We are the interbeing, like, some of the Zen Buddhists, talk about. But also when we also look at the different spiritual traditions, whether we are looking at a lot of the indigenous knowledge communities, it's the same concept of interconnectedness that we've seen in the systems thinking world, and we've also seen in the transformative leadership world. Ubuntu is the African philosophy of personhood and what it essentially means to be human. So this helps us answer that question of what it means to be human. And so people who are socialized within the Ubuntu, it's actually a Ngoni word from South Africa, the Southern Africa, but it's in Kenya, for instance, in the eastern part of Africa, we call it Utu, that is in Kiswahili, or in my native language, my mother tongue, Ekegusi, we call it Obomwanyavanto. It's the same thing, Ubuntu, the African philosophy of what, essential of personhood, what it essentially means to be human. This is a definition by Mulunga. So again, I said in Kenya, it's Utu, Obomwanyavanto, and Ubuntu, it's Southern Africa. It's a common saying about I am because we are. We are, therefore I am. So this acknowledges our interconnectedness, our interbeingness. So it's a deep African belief system in our interconnectedness, interdependence, and our shared humanity. The late South Africa's Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu frequently quoted the Zulu proverb saying, Umuntu gumuntu gabantu, which translates a person is a person through other persons. So we realize that I am because you are. I am not if you are not. So we have to acknowledge each other. That's where they say, I see you, Sawabona. I see you. So there's the greeting, I see you. Most African communities have that, as a greeting, you see someone and say, hey, I see you. That's a greeting. It's just really acknowledging, not just seeing you physically, but the being in you acknowledges the being in you. It goes to, and other communities say that. So Ubuntu speaks to the very essence of being human. My humanity is caught up in and inexplicably bound in yours. And then we belong in a bundle of life. We say, hey, so-and-so has Ubuntu. They are generous, they are hospitable, they are friendly, they are caring and compassionate. You share, what you have. That's the concept of Ubuntu. So the challenge for us as transformative leaders is, as we start now integrated transformative leadership systems, thinking and leading change, because when we want to lead change, the foundation of leading change is building trust with people. When you really see people, when you see people as part of who you are, as a reflection of who you are, you treat them very differently. All the ranks of position of leadership, of status start falling apart. And then we start seeing the people, then you start building trust. So we are challenged as transformative leaders to start looking at, future state critical self-reflection. These are some questions you can take, how do I define my identity? Is it inward or is it universal? Is it interconnected? So when we start looking at identity also, what does it mean? How do I identify I'm a woman or I'm a man or I'm a Christian or I'm a Muslim or I'm American or I'm Indian or I'm Kenyan, whatever. So how do we define, and then we also have dominant identities. We are not saying share your identities, but how can we hold these identities loosely so we can create room for us to have a universal view, a systems, holistic orientation to understanding who we are and our relationship with the world, which informs, reflects on the values that we have, we embody, and we operationalize. So what do I identify with after we define our dominant identity? What do I identify with? What about this identity, that I have is important to me? So this can help us really start understanding where we are and where we want to be as transformative leaders who can embody a systems orientation and systems thinking. Why is this aspect of identity important to me? How did I develop this identity? So we can start listening and reflecting and learning. Often is through the social systems, the cultures, the things we've been told and we've been taught. How long have I held this identity? Why does this identity inform me and my ways of being in leadership? Or does it inform my ways of being in leadership? Sorry about that typo. Does this identity enable me to show up as a systems thinker? Do I see the interconnectedness, the relational aspect of leadership, of being in leadership, or do I see things as separate? Those people versus us, those things versus, or do I see the greater whole? How does this affect me? Does my identity and leadership embody me to build trust with others so that I can lead change? So the different answers that we come to these questions can really inform and help us start doing our work as systems thinkers and as transformative leaders, especially if we want to lead change at times of complexity and uncertainty, when we know that when we understand that cause and effects are not, what is it about the problem or the challenge that we face, for example, if it is at work? Who needs to be in the room? Is everybody involved? What are all those different parts of this system that need to be here, that need to be at the table, that we need to engage in the process? So this is the overview around systems. So we really have to see the systems to shape the future as leaders, as transformative leaders. If we don't see the full system, understand its different parts, its components, and their relationships, and how one change in the system impacts another, then we cannot shape the future as leaders and as transformative leaders. So I think I'm going to stop there so that I can open up the few minutes that we have. Maybe we can take some questions. So if we had more time, we could have delved a little deeper to look at examples and questions on how this is applied in different contexts. But I've stopped sharing, and I'm going to open these up to questions. Thank you so much for listening. I know I was trying to go really fast because we don't have a lot of time. There was a lot to cover there, but I hope I've interested you enough to ask questions and share your views about transformative leadership, systems change, and leading change.
Thank you very, very much for having this information with us and really breaking these things down. Well, okay, so to start off, first, you said something very important that kind of ties in with my topic, my interest topic, which is psychology. I do want to go to this school particularly to study um, expressive arts therapy. And when you were explaining Ubuntu, like it helped me to kind of just grasp something else you also said as far as uh, who do we carry ourselves as holistically? I've been on a very deep spiritual healing journey, art therapy, and I've really had to like question myself and challenge myself even of old narratives that I was trying to tie in with my identity and recognizing that I was hitting a bit of a wall when it came to the conventional thinking and the strategic thinking and how I show up as a leader. What are the little things that I'm doing that's kind of help shaping a future that could, kind of just be a safe space or a sacred space rather for everyone. And so I guess my question following up now is with everything that you've explained and put together, I want to know what are your thoughts, or if there is a bridge to evolve from the current identity we're, I guess, embodying? Like, is it possible to still remain the same identity to the core while shedding away any old um, things that we resonate with that could eventually come back into a strategic way of thinking?
Thank you so much for your question. That's really important. You're right. We all have old narratives, old stories that we tell ourselves because these come from the way we've been socialized, the cultures that we're part of, the social system that we're part of. So as we evolve, as we grow, and like what you're saying, you've been on this journey of it's spiritual path or your own conscious evolution, and coming to self-awareness. So this actually requires so your question actually is yes, we can transform and grow, but it requires a deep sense of self-awareness. And that has to, just one day at a time, take it slow, one day at a time, and start being self-aware about how you identify. What is my dominant identity? Maybe it's your nationality, or maybe it's your gender. It's different, or your religion. Those are usually the big things, people fall to, and this and that, and then look at that and realize that that is you're identifying as that because that's what you were told you are, or that has been your experience. But if you want to move from that narrow lens of view of your identity to something more universal in terms of more encompassing, or say, for example, like for Ubuntu, it actually helps you realize that you are a part of a greater whole of humanity, of other human beings. So it takes me out of my head and my own self-defined identity, whether it's my gender, I see that, yeah, I'm a man or I'm a woman, but yeah, there are other people, okay, or in my religion, then we say, no, I'm part of a greater whole, and there are other differences, and then I can respect that. Because often what happens is we dig in and say, this is how to be, this has been socialized, whether it's religion or nationality or gender or, other different ways. So yes, you can actually transform. So the challenge is, take courses, hey, come on to CIIS, this is part of the work that we do here, and learn more about how to embody that, because of course 1 hour is not enough for us to go into a deeper way of talking about the now and doing that self-transformation. But it could require spiritual work, psychological work. It could require, there's different components to it. And there's a lot of resources out there on, so it's moving from a limited, an individualistic type of identities to something a bit more collective and more universal. A lot of the indigenous spiritual traditions embrace that universality. So yes, it is possible to do that. Thank you very much.
So when we're moving from the theoretical to maybe trying to conceptualize how to become more practical or operationalize some of this, I mean, will we be investigating that as well, or does it stay purely in the abstract? Because I'm thinking about, so you have systems within systems. So an example would be the patriarchy and economic system of, let's say, the US. Then we have the healthcare system inside the US, which mirrors that in many, many ways. But as you described the complex system, there's so many unexpected interfacing and interaction. I mean, what if we want to take on something like that healthcare program, healthcare system? How do we approach these multiple complex systems that are becoming a greater complex system, are also reflective of, an internal and external system and all of the complexity that's within each? How do we even begin?
Thank you. That's a really good question, rather. You're right. These are complex systems. So what we do, one of the things to do is to have hope. Let's have hope. And also inspire hope in other people that despite the complexities that we face, despite it looks so difficult. Sometimes it even looks impossible, like where do you start? But it's to realize that it's possible. And then to develop the skills and knowledge to understand systems thinking and how we can apply that. Now, there are people, and there's a lot of resources and case studies of how systems thinking has been applied in different contexts, whether it's for healthcare systems, whether it's within organizations, whether it's within the, in the economic setup. Like Rianne Eisler's work is really good, where she talks about a caring economics that's not ranked, that also centers women, for example, who have been largely left out of some of the, a male-dominated economic system when we look at it. So yes, it is possible to look at systems, but there's a whole process of that. So, but you can acquire the skills and the knowledge and the practice to learn how to do it. So it's very possible. But what I would say is let's have hope that this is possible. Transformative leaders always have hope and know that, we can co-create and invite other people into the picture. This is not a task that we'll undertake on our own. We need to create room and spaces for everybody's voice to participate so that we can really understand what are those pain points from the different components of the system. Because if we are not listening to everyone, then we will miss a point and we cannot transform that system. But when we create room and space for all voices, for everyone to come to the table, to be heard, then we can really start seeing this is where we need to make. These are the leverage points where we can make changes, shifts to really change the values and the structures of the system. So I hope that helped. But yes, it is possible to do that.
I hear what you're saying is that you have to have a complex approach to a complex problem. In other words, it can't just be an individual. It has to be an inclusive response at so many levels.
Absolutely. It's collaborative. It's interconnected. It is having a universal, what some people would call a cosmic worldview, and not just a very narrow way of this and that and then dig in. It's holding our identities loosely enough to respect everybody so that they can actually come and sit at the table for us to be able to co-create. So it is possible. So identify those people, start where you are. I always say, just start where you are. Start with yourself and bring one person or two other people, and you'll be amazed. And then slowly you can start influencing change. So complex systems change takes time. It's part of what we also do at CIIS. We support students learn more about the systems thinking and leadership and how they can apply it.
It's about the collaborative leadership. It's similar to transformative leadership because I see a lot of similar aspects in both of them.
Absolutely, absolutely. A big component of transformative leadership is collaboration. We need that because we know we can do it. That's why it acknowledges everydayness. Everyone can participate, every contribution. So it's collaborative. It values our interconnected. So yes, collaboration is a big component of transformative leadership. So it encompasses that. Thank you so much.